Every person who has ever been told from the earliest age they can remember that their life has a predetermined shape, that a specific role awaits them, and that the entire arc of their existence is oriented toward the eventual occupation of that role, carries within them a particular kind of relationship with the future that most people never have to develop. For most people, the future is uncertain in the most basic sense, an open space that will be filled by choices not yet made and circumstances not yet encountered. And the uncertainty itself, however anxious it might sometimes feel, carries within it a kind of freedom, the freedom of genuinely not knowing and therefore genuinely being able to become something that has not already been determined. Prince William has never had access to that kind of uncertainty, not in any meaningful sense, because the central fact of his existence, the fact that has shaped every significant decision made about his upbringing and his education and his preparation since before he could understand what any of it meant, has been the knowledge shared by everyone around him and eventually internalized by him as a basic fact about who he is, that he will one day be king. This knowledge has been the organizing principle of his entire life, and everything that has happened to him, every test he has faced, and every challenge he has navigated, has happened in the shadow of this larger and more permanent test that has not yet fully arrived, but that has been approaching, steadily and inexorably, for his entire existence. That larger test is closer now than it has been at any previous point in his life, closer in ways that recent years have made undeniably clear, and the specific challenges that he is currently navigating, the health crisis affecting his father, the ongoing operational pressures on an institution that is stretched thinner than it has been in living memory, the unresolved family fracture with his brother that shows no sign of meaningful repair, the broader questions about the institution's relevance and legitimacy that have intensified during a period when the institution can least afford additional pressure. All of these specific challenges are themselves tests, real and significant tests that he is navigating in real time, with consequences that matter enormously for the people and the institution involved. But they are also, in a deeper sense, preparation for and a preview of the larger test that awaits him, the test of actually becoming king, of actually carrying the full weight of the institution that he has spent his entire life being prepared to eventually lead. Understanding what Prince William's biggest test actually is requires understanding both the immediate specific tests he is currently facing and the larger, more permanent test that those immediate tests are, in important ways, a rehearsal for. The immediate test of his father's health crisis is, in some ways, the most personally significant of everything William is currently navigating, because it combines the universal human experience of watching a parent face a frightening diagnosis with the specifically royal complication of having to do so while simultaneously managing significant public responsibilities and significant institutional pressures that do not pause to accommodate personal grief or personal fear. The ordinary experience of an adult child supporting a parent through serious illness involves its own profound challenges. The renegotiation of roles within a family, as the parent who has always been the source of authority and support, becomes, in some respects, the one who needs authority and support. The management of one's own fear about losing a parent while trying to provide stability and care for that parent and for other family members who are processing the same fear, the practical logistics of medical appointments and treatment decisions, and the countless small adjustments that serious illness requires of everyone connected to the person experiencing it. William has had to navigate all of this in the ordinary human sense, as a son watching his father face cancer, with all the complicated love and complicated history that exists between any father and son layered on top of the immediate crisis. but he has also had to navigate something that ordinary adult children supporting an ill parent do not have to navigate, which is the question of institutional continuity and institutional function during a period when the person at the center of the institution is not able to operate at full capacity. This has required William to take on additional responsibilities, to represent the institution in contexts and with a frequency that exceeds what would have been required of him in ordinary circumstances, while simultaneously processing the personal reality of his father's illness and while continuing to manage his own existing responsibilities in his own family life with Catherine and their children. The combination of these demands, personal grief and fear, increased institutional responsibility, and the maintenance of his own existing commitments represents a genuine test of capacity and resilience that he has had to meet without the option of stepping back or asking for reduced expectations, because the institution's needs do not pause for the personal circumstances of the people who serve it, however significant those circumstances might be. The test of navigating Catherine's own health crisis, which arrived in close proximity to his father's diagnosis and created a period during which William was simultaneously supporting his wife through serious illness and his father through serious illness, while also managing the institutional pressures that both crises created, represents perhaps the most acute period of personal and professional pressure that William has faced in his adult life. The specific demands of this period, protecting his children from the full weight of what their parents and grandparents were experiencing, while also being genuinely present for his wife during her treatment and recovery, while also continuing to fulfill at least some of his institutional responsibilities, while also processing his own fear and his own grief about the possibility of losing people he loves, represent a test of a kind that few people, royal or otherwise, ever have to face in such concentrated form. The fact that he navigated this period without it producing any kind of visible institutional or personal collapse, that he continued to function and to fulfill at least the most essential of his responsibilities throughout, is itself evidence of a degree of resilience and capacity that deserves more direct acknowledgement than the carefully managed public account of this period typically provides. The test of managing the operational gap created by reduced capacity across the institution, a gap created by the combination of health challenges affecting multiple senior royals simultaneously and the previous departure of other working royals who would, in different circumstances, have been available to share the burden of public representation, has required William to take on a degree of institutional responsibility earlier and more extensively than would have been the case if circumstances had unfolded differently. This is not simply a matter of attending more events or fulfilling more engagements, though it is certainly that. It is a matter of having to develop, more quickly than might otherwise have been necessary, the judgment and the experience and the public presence that the role of carrying significant institutional weight requires, judgment and experience and presence that are normally developed gradually over the course of a long apprenticeship, rather than being required in concentrated and accelerated form, because circumstances have removed the luxury of gradual development. The test of the unresolved relationship with his brother is, in some ways, the most quietly difficult of all the tests William is currently facing, because it is a test that has no clear resolution available, and that he has to navigate not through any single decisive action, but through an ongoing series of choices about how to manage a relationship that remains significantly damaged in the full glare of public attention, while also managing everything else that his role requires of him. The specific content of what William feels about the situation with Harry, the genuine emotional reality underneath the carefully managed public silence that has characterized his public response to the rift, is not something that has been shared in any detail reflecting both his general approach to managing his public presentation and the specific sensitivity of the situation. But the absence of public disclosure does not mean the absence of genuine difficulty, and the test of navigating a significant and publicly documented family rupture while maintaining the public composure that his role requires, while also potentially harboring genuine hope for eventual repair or genuine grief about the relationship's current state or some combination of both, is a real and ongoing test that does not have the kind of clear resolution point that other tests might have. The test of public scrutiny and public expectation, the test of operating as one of the most visible people in the world while every aspect of his behavior, his public statements, his family life, his approach to his role is subject to a level of analysis and judgment that almost nobody else in any comparable position has to face, is a test that William has been navigating in some form for his entire adult life. But that has intensified in recent years as the broader scrutiny of the royal family has intensified and as his own position within the institution has become more central. The specific challenge of this test is not just the volume of scrutiny, but its character, the fact that it operates according to standards that are often contradictory, demanding both relatability and dignity, both transparency and discretion, both modernity and respect for tradition, in combinations that are genuinely difficult to satisfy simultaneously, and that leave him in a position where almost any choice he makes will be criticized by someone for failing to satisfy one or another of these competing expectations. The test of preparing his own children for a future that will, in different ways and to different degrees, replicate some of the same pressures and some of the same predetermined quality that has shaped his own life, represents one of the more privately significant tests that William faces, a test that connects directly to the choices he has made about how to raise George and Charlotte and Louis differently from how he and Harry were raised, choices that reflect lessons he has clearly drawn from his own childhood and from the specific ways that institutional culture failed to adequately support him and his brother during the most difficult periods of their early lives, particularly around the loss of their mother. The specific approach that William and Catherine have taken, an approach that emphasizes more conventional schooling, more deliberate protection of family time and family privacy, more explicit attention to the children's emotional well-being than was characteristic of previous generations' approach to royal childhood, represents an attempt to pass this particular test in a way that genuinely learns from history rather than simply repeating it. Whether this attempt succeeds, whether the structural pressures of royal childhood can genuinely be mitigated through more thoughtful parenting choices, or whether those structural pressures will eventually assert themselves regardless of how thoughtfully the immediate parenting is handled, is a question that will not be fully answered for years. But the seriousness with which William appears to be approaching this particular test is itself notable. The test of institutional reform, of determining what changes the monarchy actually needs to make to remain relevant and legitimate in a changing world, and of having the influence, even from his current position as heir rather than monarch, to actually advance those changes against the institutional resistance that any significant change inevitably generates, is a test that William is navigating with less public visibility than some of his other challenges, but that may ultimately be the most consequential for the long-term future of the institution he will eventually lead. The specific positions William holds on questions of institutional transparency, institutional culture, the right scale and structure for the monarchy's future, the right balance between tradition and modernization, are not fully known publicly, because the institutional culture of discretion that governs how senior royals communicate about institutional strategy means that William's own views on these questions are communicated, if at all, through indirect signals rather than direct public statement. But the choices he is making now, in terms of which causes he prioritizes, which approaches to public engagement he favors, which aspects of traditional royal practice he appears willing to modify, and which he appears committed to preserving, provide some indication of the direction he may eventually take the institution when the larger test, the test of actually being king, finally arrives. This larger test, the test that all of the current specific tests are, in important ways, a preparation for, is the test that will ultimately define whether everything William has navigated up to this point amounts to adequate preparation for the role he has spent his entire life being prepared for. The specific shape that this larger test will take depends on circumstances that cannot yet be fully known, on the state of the institution and the state of public opinion and the state of the broader world at the moment when the transition from his father's reign to his own eventually occurs. But certain elements of the larger test can be anticipated based on the trajectory of the challenges the institution is currently facing. He will inherit an institution that has been significantly tested by the combination of health challenges, family fractures, changed media dynamics, and generational shifts in public attitude that have characterized the current period, and the task of leading that institution forward will require him to address challenges that his father's reign, itself only beginning to find its footing when these challenges intensified, has not had the opportunity to fully resolve. He will need to determine, with the authority that only the role of monarch provides, what kind of institutional transparency and institutional accountability the monarchy of the future actually requires, decisions that his current position as heir, despite whatever influence he may have, cannot fully determine because the final authority for such decisions rests with the reigning monarch rather than the heir apparent. He will need to navigate the continuing evolution of the relationship with his brother, whatever state that relationship is in, by the time he assumes the throne, in a context where the dynamics of that relationship will themselves be different once William occupies the role of monarch rather than heir, a change in position that could either provide new opportunities for repair or could entrench the existing distance, depending on choices that neither of them has yet had to make. And he will need to lead an institution whose relevance to a changing public, particularly a younger public, whose relationship with traditional institutions of every kind is considerably more conditional and more skeptical than that of previous generations, will require genuine adaptation rather than simply the continuation of approaches that have served previous reigns, but that may not adequately serve the specific conditions he will inherit. Whether William is prepared for this larger test, whether everything he has navigated in the years leading up to it has genuinely equipped him with the judgment and the resilience and the vision that the role will require, is a question that cannot be definitively answered in advance, because the role of monarch is one that nobody can fully rehearse for, regardless of how extensive their preparation has been. But the evidence available from how he has navigated the specific concentrated tests of recent years, the health crises affecting people he loves, the operational pressures of a stretched institution, the unresolved pain of a fractured family relationship, the relentless scrutiny of a public that demands contradictory things from him simultaneously, suggests a person who has demonstrated genuine capacity to function under genuine pressure, to maintain a degree of stability and competence even when the circumstances around him have been genuinely difficult. This is not a guarantee of how he will perform in the larger test that still awaits him, but it is evidence, real and significant evidence, that whatever that larger test ultimately requires, he is approaching it, having already demonstrated, in the smaller tests that have preceded it, something of what he is actually capable of when the pressure is genuinely significant and the stakes are genuinely real.